Begin the current Daf Mesechtas Rosh Hashanah Daf. Begin on the second line down at the top of the Yomid. The Gemara continues the discussion with the previous Daf. We had discussed regarding the idea about is there a tefillah that could happen after Gizar Din or not. So we had answered that, okay, depends if it's a tzibur or yachid. The yachid could be not, and tzibur could be, and that's why the Gemara continues and discusses both those. That maybe even a yachid could be davening after the Gizar Din, and maybe even a tzibur cannot work after Gizar Din, and it's too late already. Shis corresponds to Akasa and Cheskel, Tainim, that Bachem joining us for today's daf. Some of the things discussed in today's daf are more discussion about the power of tshuva, to raise evil decrees, a curse that was placed on the descendants of Eli Kohen, stories that several people overcame this curse, times of the year, starting with the next Mishnah, the messengers of Bezdin went out to inform the public as to when Rosh Chodesh was set. Some of the important terms and concepts we discussed in today's daf are Kiddush HaChodesh, which is that when the two witnesses would see the Moiled, the Halavana, see the new moon, they would come and testify, and the courts would be Kiddush HaChodesh. Pesach Sheni is that if someone missed Pesach Rishon, he was Tameh, was B'derech HaChekar, so then he would bring Pesach a month later. Rabbi Achikim was one of the last leaders of the Jewish people who was left over after the Gullus, and when he was murdered, which was in the second day of Rosh Hashanah, they made it as a public fast day for all time, and it couldn't be done on the second day because that was Rosh Hashanah, but rather they did it on Gimel Tishrei. Megillus Tainus was a scroll that was written that about certain days that are forbidden to fast because they were Yom Tovim, but after the Churban Beis Hamikdash, then they nullified that besides Chanukah and Purim, about days that one is not allowed to fast and even eulogize. So we begin the current Daf Yomi, second line down at the top of the Yomid, where the Gemara, as we said, continues on the premise that we said that a Gizar Din by a tzibur could be rescinded, but not by an individual. On that, the Gemara says, actually, second line down on that, it says, Gizar Din the Yachid, even there, by when there's a decree on an individual, Tanoi, it's a machlekes Tanoim, if even an individual can daven and rescind that decree. The time of Linda Bryson. Meir said, Shnaim sha'alu lamita. Two people go into the bed, for Chol and Shabbat, and they're laying in bed because they both have the same sickness. And let's say you have two people that are going to the court where they judge for capital punishment. They're going both lead them to be judged. And B'dinim Shabbat, they also are being judged for the same thing. They both were caught for the same crime. This person will come down from the bed. This one's not going to come down of the bed. This one will be saved from the court. This one won't be saved. Why is this one coming out of bed? This one's not coming out of bed. Why is Why is this guy being saved from the prosecution and this one's not being saved? Because this guy davened and he was answered. This one davened and it wasn't answered. But then the question becomes, why is it this one is answered and this one's not answered? Because this one who davened a complete tefillah, like Rashi says, he was niskaven, he had kavana, so neme, he's answered. And this is where you see that even though he's an individual, even though there's a gzar din, but the tefillah is going to be effective. But so therefore, the other one who didn't daven a complete tefillah, he didn't have kavana, therefore he wasn't answered, and therefore this one's saved and this one is not saved. But again, you see that this first opinion holds that a yachid could daven even after there's a gzar din. A different answer to the question, Rabbi Lazar, he says that actually no. I'll tell you why one is answered, one is not. Khan, the one who's answered is Kohen Gzar Din. Says that's before the Gzar Din. Khan, the one who's not answered is La'ach Gzar Din, where it's too late already. Which again, that's the same machlekes that we mentioned. Is it like the first time it says that yes, it's both by Yoch and La'ach Gzar Din, question of Vidav and the Tefillah Shleim or not? Well, the second answer said that no, actually that sort of depends on. A Yochid actually is not answered La'ach Gzar Din, and the one who is answered is Kohen Gzar Din. Yitzchak is a third interpretation. It says, Yafet Sa'akal Adam. Now, screaming out is always good for the person, which essentially is like the first Atana. Ben Kohen Gzar Din, Ben La'ach Gzar Din, whether before the Gzar Din, whether after the Gzar Din, that a person is always going to be answered. And so we see a clear time that says that screaming out, davening, is always effective, even at La'ach Gzar Din. And therefore, unlike what we said in the previous daf, that by Yochad it's not going to be answered, we see that those who hold that it would be. Now, actually, the Gemara asks now in the opposite direction. We had said, but for a tzibur, they tear up their decrees even if there was already gzardin with their tefillas. Says the Gemara, gzardin the tzibur mikra. Is that really true that the decree on the public could be torn up afterwards? But the pasuk in Yomei that says, kabsi meida al libech, cleanse from the evil your heart. Uksiv, and it says the pasuk in Yirmiyah, which kapsi cleanse sounds like that it's totally cleansed, like it's clean. Now there's a pasuk in Yirmiyah that says also ki im techabsi beneser, because if you're gonna clean with neser, which is a type of detergent, and you're gonna increase the amount of soap, nichtem avoynech lefonai, the stain of your sin is in front of me. Now that's a contradiction. One pasuk makes it sound like that you could be totally cleansed. The other one says no, that bead stain on that shirt and that white shirt is never coming out. It's always going to be over there. So how do we understand this? My love, isn't it that Khan? When did we say that it's going to be cleansed? It's Kohen Gzardin. It's before the decree. Khan after Gzardin. And when's the stain going to be? There's going to be after Gzardin, which we're talking about the Klal Yisrael over here. So you see, even by a tzibur that after Gzardin you cannot tear it up. So the Gemara, no, it's not difficult. Both of them are talking about after Gzardin, and yes, because even after Gzardin, the tzibur's decree could be torn up. But like Kasha, so what do we do with the contradiction? It says, no, it's not difficult because Khan, when did we say the stain is going to remain over there as Gzardin Shesh Meshvua? Is talking about a decree that has an oath with it. Khan, when did we say that it can be cleansed as Gzardin Shein Meshvua? Is a regular decree that doesn't have an oath related to it, that the tzibur davening could go ahead and tear that up. Could do that Shmuel Ba'ami. The Rav Shmuel Ba'ami, Ba'amal says Rav Shmuel Ba'nachmeni, Amar Rabbi Yonasan. Minayin Gzardin Shesh Meshvua. How do we know that if it's a decree that has an oath attached to it, Shein Nikah, then it cannot be torn? Shneimah says the pasuk in Shmuel Aleph. It says V'lechein nishba'ati lebeis Eli. So Hashem says, therefore I have sworn to the household of Eli, in miskaper avain beis Eli bezevach b'mincha. If the sin of the house of Eli will be atoned with karbanas, with flour offerings, no, they're not going to be atoned. That is exer with a shvu. Hashem is swearing. Nishbati. That has nothing to do about that. You can't daven. But a regular gzardin, that yes, a person that the tzibur could tear it up with their tefillas. Now, however, but the Gemara is still medaik, even though there was a shvu over there and said they're not going to get atonement. But Omar Rava or the Girsa's Rava says with an animal sacrifice or a flower offering, then there's not going to be atonement for the Beis Eli. On the Skap Torah, it's saying they're not going to get atonement b'zevach mincha, but with Torah they will get atonement. And Abai Ami says b'zevach mincha in Miskapi, right? With the carbon and the flower offering, they're not going to get atonement. On the Skap Torah Gimel Chasadim, but they will get atonement with Torah and Gimel Chasadim. So they're both saying different diukim in the pasuk, whether only Torah or Gimel Chasadim, that then they will get atonement. And actually, the Gemara shows this in practice. That Rabbi and Abai, that's why the gears have changed from Rabbi to Rabbi before. Both Rabbi and Abai, who said these interpretations, Midabeis Eli Kasa, they actually were from the household of Eli. Rabbi Dasik B'Torah, so Rabbi, this was their two interpretations, L'Shitasim. Rabbi held that the atonement will be with Torah, and Abai held with Torah Gimel Chasadim. So Rabbi Dasik B'Torah, that he told them Torah, Chaya Arba and Shnin, he lived for 40 years. Abai Dasik B'Torah Gimel Chasadim, Chaya Shitin Shnin, because really not supposed to live past 20. Rabbi learned Torah, he lived to 40. Abai, who did Torah and Gimel Chasadim, he lived till 60. Now, Torah Braisa actually related to this decree on the Beis Eli. There was one family in Yerushalayim. Their family members would die when they reached 18 years of age. So Bo V'hidiyu asked Rabbi Yochanan Zaki, told Rabbi Yochanan Zaki, what's going on? So he said to them, maybe you're from the family of Eli. It says over this passage, small aleph, and all those who are raised in your house, they're going to die when they become men, when they become an adult. Once they reach the age of 18, 20, then they're going to die. Go and toil in Torah and you live. So they learned Torah, they went to Koil all day, and then they lived. They called the family Mishpachas Rabbi Yochanan on his name because he gave that idea, and they lived. Continue on the previous theme of that pasuk that we mentioned before. It says, how do you know regarding the decree on the public that it's not sealed? One says, what? It's not sealed? But the pasuk in Yomei we mentioned before says nechtem, which it's actually not the same word of nechtem, of sealed, but it says nechtem aboinech lefanai, that your sin is there's a stain of your sin in front of me, which means to say that obviously that there is a seal of the sin in front of Hashem. Rather, no, we didn't mean that it's not sealed. Rather, avgav shenechtem, that even though that there is a seal, the nikra, it is torn, like we mentioned this thing before, that you could tzerayis in the gzar din of a tzibur. It says a pasuk in Devar. Pasuk says the beginning of that pasuk is Kimiga Gadol, because who's like the great nation? That to him God is close to him, which it says Kashem Lekeinu, like Hashem our God. B'chol Kareinu Elav, whenever we call out to him, which we see that a Jew could always call out as a tzibur, even if they did it an aveira and there's a gzar din, you could always tear up that decree. But says the Gemara, Buksiv, this is a famous question. In pasuk in Yeshaya, it says Dirshu Hashem b'himatzai, seek out Hashem when he is found. So you see that it's not all the time that you could call out to Hashem. It's b'himatzai, when he's found. So that seems to contradict it. It says the Gemara, hasam b'yachid hacha b'tzibo. Well, when do we say that you have to find him and you have to call out to him when he can be found? That's by an individual. He's not available all the time. But a tzibur always could call out to him b'chol kareinu olav, and therefore you could always rip up the decree no matter when it is. Says the Gemara, b'yachid emes. When is it for an individual that Hashem has found for him, like it says in the pasuk b'himatzai? This is what we call Aseret Tshuva, the 10 days of Rosh Hashanah Daf, where an individual has a status of like a tzibur, and whenever he's calling out to Hashem, Hashem will listen to him. Now going back to the pasuk we quoted in Shmuel Aleph, so the Gemara quotes a pasuk that says Vayhi Kaser Sayam, that it was like a period of 10 days, meaning based on what we just said before, we spoke about the Aseret Tshuva. So the Gemara is going to bring related teaching. There was 10 days, V'yigav Hashem es Navel, and then Hashem he afflicted Navel. Now the question is, Yud Yom and Ma'av V'Teter, what's this 10-day gap that Hashem waited to go ahead and harm Navel? So Amar Rabbi Yehuda Madavi says, Keneged Esel Legimois Shenosin Navel LaAbdi David, because David Melech had sent 10 servants to Navel. Like the pasuk says in Shmuel Al Perchafei, and he gave them one meal. So therefore, because of these 10 gulps, is like it's called, these 10 portions that Navel gave to the slaves of David, so therefore that delayed the punishment for a period of 10 days. But another teaching, and this is related to what we had just said, he says, these are the 10 days between Rosh Hashanah and Kippurim that Hashem waited for him to repent, and he didn't repent. And because that's a certain tshuva, and those are the 10 days that he waited to go ahead and punish Navel. We continue with the halacha of our Mishnah that we said, Rosh Hashanah, one of the we had spoke about our topic was Abba Rosh Hashanah, and one of the Rosh Hashanahs was Rosh Hashanah Kol Boya Oilam Oibim Lefana Kibnei Morayin. Rosh Hashanah, all those who come to the world, they pass in front of Hashem Kibnei Morayin. Frek the Gemara, my Kibnei Morayin. What does it mean that Rosh Hashanah everyone passes in front of Hashem like the sons of Morayin? The Gemara brings 3 interpretations. Here they translate in Babel, it's kibnei imrana, meaning like lambs. Maron is also, and marana is also a terminology of a lamb. Now, what does lambs have to do with Rosh Hashanah? That when you count lambs, you make a small little narrow exit from the corral, because you want to count which is the 10th one to give Ma'aseh Behema. And they go one after another, and you can't have more than one going out at a time. So that's the idea. Rosh Hashanah, like sheep passing through a narrow opening one after the other, is that Hashem says, okay, every single one, I want to see you individually. You can't like squeeze your way in through getting onto the ride, hiding behind someone or whatever. There's only enough room for one to go at a time. Similarly, and they all have a similar theme to them. Shlach Shlomi says, Kemailas Beis Maroin, like the narrow passage going up to Beis Maron, that the path is narrow and you can't have 2 people going on either side, where the valley is very deep on both sides. So you have to have only one person going at a time. That's the same idea, and that's where the word Kibnei Maron is, like Beis Maron. And Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel, he says the third interpretation, Kichayola Shalbeis David. He says like the soldiers of the Davidic dynasty, where Maron also could be like a word of moros. Moros is a terminology of authority and leadership. So that's how they would count them. These soldiers, they would go one after another going out to war. That's how they would march. And again, it all signifies this idea that when a person's being judged Rosh Hashanah, it's you and not with a group, not with another person, not with your mother, your father, your sister, your brother, your wife, your daughter, your co-worker, your friend, nothing. It's like you are there passing in front of Hashem at that time. Now, however, what's interesting is, he says, but even though they're passing by one after another, Hashem, so to speak, in one glance, glances at them all, and that's how he judges them at the same time. So although it's individually you, but it's still Hashem doing it in one glance. Says, this idea that they're all looked at and judged in one glance is also learned in our Mishnah. From the fact that the Tana of a Mishnah, when it explains this halacha of Oivim Lefanov K'nei Merayim, brings the pasuk of a Tehillim, Hayotze Yach Libam, that he forms together their hearts, Hamivin Al Kamasem, that he understands to their actions. So the question is, first of all, what is the pasuk saying? And what does it approve to the din of Rosh Hashanah of Oivim Lefanov K'nei Merayim? That he forms their hearts together and he understands their actions? What does it do with K'nei Merayim? So, if you think it means to say that he created the whole world, and that he makes their hearts the same, like the heart of this person is the heart of this person. We see it's not the way. I'm more sensitive. I'm an empath, and he's an extrovert. What does that mean? We have all different types of people. So Allah, this is what it means. The Creator. Raya, he sees Yachad together at the same time, Libam, their hearts, their emotions, and he understands all their actions. So it's like Rashi says, actually going back on the pasuk beforehand. Hishkiach el kol yoshvei haaretz. He's mashkiach, he overlooks to all those who live on the land, and that's the saying, the one who created them, he is looking, this mashkiach from the previous Yachad, Libam, so although it doesn't say Raya, but it's going back from the previous pasuk, it says Hishkiach. He's looking, Hayotzer, Yachad Libam, and he's able to see it all at the same time. That's what the pasuk is trying to explain, qualifying this Kivnei Merayim, although everyone passing by one at a time, but he still sees it all together at the same time, and that's how he judged it. Now with that, we continue to the next Mishnah, beginning this sugya of Kiddush HaChodesh, of where the way it was, is that the courts would sanctify the new month based on the witnesses who, when they saw the new month, then the courts would say, Makudesh, it's a new month, and then they would send out shluchim to the Goyla, to the diaspora, to let them know the day that was sanctified, if it was on day 30, and that means to say that if day 30 is day 1 of the new month, that means the previous month was what's called a chaser, because only 29 days, or it's on day 31, and that means to say the previous month was 30 days, which is a mali. A month is 29 and a half days. You can't not make it 29 and a half days, it has to be full days. So it's either going to be 29 or 30. 29 is called chaser, it's lacking, and 30 is called mali, which is a full month. And then that's going to be depending when you're seeing the next, when you're making the new month, which is the new moon is there, and you're saying Makudesh, it's either going to be on day 30, that's day 1 of the new month, and that makes again the previous one only 29, or you can just do it on day 31, which makes the previous one 30. So now, regarding this, that you made Kiddush HaChodesh, the courts now would send out specific times when it was important to know for the diaspora when exactly was the day, because it really doesn't make a difference to them in regards to daily life, but they had to know regards to if it's a Yom Tov. So there were certain months that they would send out, and that's what the Mishnah tells us, Shish Chadashim. On 6 months, Hashluchin Yotzim. The agents from the court would go out and notify the people in the diaspora when the courts, because specifically in Yerushalayim, that they in Eretz Yisrael, that they would make this into the Kiddush HaChodesh. So they had to notify them. When did they do this? So on Nisan, the month of Nisan, they would let them know when was Rosh Chodesh Nisan they have Pesach, because they have to know when's the 15th of Nisan to make Pesach, and therefore the agents would go up and go Pesach except for Shabbos. Now, Tais says, and what's with Sivan, which we seem to skip that for Shavuos. So that's not necessary because it's not dependent on what day of Sivan, because it depends on the Karban Omer. So whenever Pesach was, the second day of Pesach, when you start counting the 50 days, as the Gemara tells us in Daf Yomi, we said that sometimes Atzeres was the 5th of the month, or 6th of the month, or 7th of the month. Therefore, they didn't have to tell them on Shavuos for Sivan. But Al Av, they would go on the month of Av when they had tainus because of the public fast of Tisha B'Av. So the agents would go all of the 8 days except for Shabbos till they got to Tisha B'Av and letting wherever they got to let them know when it's Tisha B'Av. Al El, they would go out to let them know when Rosh Chodesh El was, and they would Rosh Hashanah. Meaning, as Rashi explains, they would let them know when was El. So although there's no Yom Tov in El per se, but they had to know for Rosh Hashanah. Because Rosh Hashanah is on the 30th day of El for those in the diaspora. Why? Because most of the years, this is how Rashi says it, El is not an extended month. It's only a 29-day month. Now, although ultimately they didn't really know in the diaspora, maybe the courts are going to make it into an extended month, a 30-day month, but they can't know, and they have to go after most years. Taisus says differently. Taisus says, no, actually, they would make Rosh Hashanah 2 days, because as the Gemara in Bay actually tells us, Rosh Hashanah was actually 2 days, and misafik. So therefore, on day 30 and day 31, then they would celebrate the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah. Now, but again, if they didn't know when El was, they wouldn't know what day 30 of El is to know when Rosh Hashanah is. Obviously, they can't let them know after Rosh Chodesh Tishrei, because Rosh Hashanah is on Rosh Chodesh Tishrei. So they have to let them know when the Rosh Chodesh El was, so that they know when is Rosh Hashanah. And Al Tishrei, they would also go out on the month of Tishrei.
So you're saying, how did they know?
Rosh Chodesh El, the courts made it on a certain day. Then they sent their agents to the diaspora.
Based on what? How did they determine if it's 29 or 30?
On El?
On Rosh Chodesh Elul, how did they determine whether
The Aiden came and they saw the...
Aiden was for Rosh Chodesh for Elul, for Rosh Chodesh Elul.
Right, so they saw the
How did they know
Levon.
how Rosh Chodesh Tishrei would be?
Right. So that's a Rashi and Taisa Bavlar thing that, well, how do they know when the moon is going to be seen? So most of the years, El was, they would make...
When was it now?
What?
When was it now?
When was it? Well, let's say if no one would see. Well, we'll see in the Gemara if you're allowed to make it when it's not. But let's say no one would see it.
But you're saying they already determined it Rosh Chodesh Elul. So how would they know what's going to be?
What did they do? They determined Rosh Chodesh El. When is Rosh Chodesh El?
When Rosh Chodesh Tishrei will be?
No, they didn't tell you. No one knew.
They told you how many days Elul was going to be. You say.
They relied on that. They assumed. It's a good question. What does that mean that Rabbi Shloimy ain't El Ma'ubar? But most of the years, they wouldn't extend the month of El. They made El 29. It was a 29. It's not like they told. It's not definitive. It was.
So when did they determine that it's going to be 30 days?
That would only be on Rosh Hashanah. Meaning when they're on.
They already send out Rosh Chodesh Elul. That's going to be 29.
No, doesn't mean they didn't send out that's going to be 29 days. With the people in the diaspora, they found out that when Rosh Chodesh El was, they're assuming it's going to be 29 days. And then I could know when to celebrate Rosh Hashanah, because 29 days later, on day 30, we're going to make Rosh Hashanah. Now, it could be Rosh Hashanah is not going to be on day 30, it's going to be day 31. But then I wouldn't know anything. I wouldn't even know what's even day 30 and day 31. Let's say Taisa. Taisa says that they always did 2 days Rosh Hashanah. So then you always know. 2 days Rosh Hashanah is automatically going to be day 30, day 31.
Okay.
So according to Taisa, definitely you understand that, like, but that I would only know if you sent me when El started, so I'll know 30 days later when Rosh Hashanah is going to be. But if you don't tell me when El is, I have no clue where to start counting 30 days from. So that's according to Taisus.
What about Pesach Shagi? What about shiur of the Tavis? What about?
Oh, so we're going to get to that. We're going to get to those questions. Yeah, exactly. That's what the Gemara is going to discuss. But that's El was for Rosh Hashanah, and then Al Tishrei they would still send out. Why sending it on Tishrei? Meaning, like Rashi says, after the court ultimately sanctified Tishrei, which obviously it wasn't going to be helpful for them for Rosh Hashanah anymore because they already celebrated Rosh Hashanah, the agents would go out the following day after Rosh Hashanah, and they would go till where they could reach up until Sukkot, and they would let them know, did the courts extend the month of El? Did they make it into the 30-day month? Or if not, why? So Rashi's words are, which is interesting, that he says it like that, Kadesh Lahi Libam Nugfam. This is a klap. I don't know is this even Yom Kippurim, is this even Sukkot? I mean, he could just say that so that they know the right day, but he's saying that their heart shouldn't be nervous, so they should know that yes, it's on this day and you're celebrating the right day Yom Kippurim and Sukkot. Al Kislev they sent up Chanukah, Val Adar Purim. Now, when the Beis was around, Yitzin Af Al Ir, they would go out on Ir when they Pesach Cotton because of Pesach Sheni. for, let's say someone was Tameh or was a Derech HaChaika on the first Pesach that he couldn't bring it, so he has to know when there's Pesach Sheni. So then they would send out on that month too, when the Beis Hamikdash was around, which obviously is only Geya when the Beis Hamikdash was around. But then the Gemara asked the question that you just asked. Okay, those are the 6 months that you tell me that the Asians go out because it's important for people to know certain dates of Yom Tovim in those months. We know Shiva Asar B'Tammuz, and B'Tevis we know Asar B'Tevis. I think it's Tintam and Beis. The Amar Rav Chana Bar Beis, Amar Rav Shimon Chasido, that all these days are days that we fast in today's times because the Beis Hamikdash is not around. Now the Mishnah is in today's times for the fact that the Mishnah said when the Mikdash was around. So obviously the Mishnah was authored when the Beis Hamikdash was not around. Now, therefore, the Shimon Chassidus says, mind said, wasn't in the pasuk in Zechariah that says, Koyim Hashem Tzavakas. So says Hashem, the Lord of hosts, Tzom Revi, the fourth, the fast of the fourth, B'Tzem Chamishi, the fast of the fifth, B'Tzem Shvi, the fast of the seventh, B'Tzem Asir, the fast of the 10th. You, the Beis Hamikdash, should be for the household of Judea, Lasas, Lasimcha. It will be for rejoicing and for gladness. Now, what is it? It's calling it a fast, and it's also calling it rejoicing and joy. It says the Gemara, yes. When there's peace, that the idol worshippers are not in control of the Jewish people, these days actually should be for rejoicing and for gladness, that it's actually forbidden to eulogize and to have a fast on these days. Ain't shalom, there's no peace. Like in today's times, where there's no peace in Mikdash and we're in the Galus, then it's going to be a fast. Okay, but one thing is what we see over here is that there are other important dates for us to know regarding the halacha of when these dates are. So why did they send that on Tammuz and on Tevis too? So Amar Pape says no. This is what Rabbi Shimon Chassidus was saying. Bisman she'esh shalom, when there's peace, meaning at the time of the Beis Hamikdash was around, Yilasas no simcha. Then these were dates for Yom Tovim, the Shiva Asar B'Tammuz and the Asar B'Tevis. Yesh Gezeres HaMalchus, if there's a decree of the government on the Jewish people, then there's an obligation to fast on those days. But Ein Gezeres HaMalchus, Ein Shalom, like in today's times where there's no specific decrees from the government, but there's no peace, meaning we don't have a Beis Hamikdash, then Rotzu Mesanen, Rotzu Ein Mesanen. If they want to fast, they could. If they want to, they don't have to fast. So as Rashi explains, since really these fasts, what we call the minor fasts, are called Rishus, they're really voluntary, although we all fast, but it's called Rishus in that way, so we're not matriach shluchim to go out on those months because they're not so critical as all these other dates, because they're really considered as Rishus. So it's not like when there's no Beis Hamikdash you have an obligation to fast. If there's a decree, then you have to fast. But here we're like in somewhere in the middle where we don't have Shalom, but we don't have Xeris Malchus. So today's times it's really Rishus, so therefore that's why we don't have to send out agents to let people know when the Shiva Asar B'Tammuz is and when the Asar B'Tevis. Then we're going to say, if that's the case, Tes B'Av Nami, then why did we say one of those is Tisha B'Av? These are all the same thing. Shiva Asar B'Tammuz and Asar B'Tevis, these are all things regarding the Churban, that those are dates of fasting. So why Tisha B'Av did you say one of the 6 months that you send out for is an Av for Tisha B'Av? There also you shouldn't have to send out agents. Amar Papa says, no, Shani Tes B'Av. Tisha B'Av is different than all the other fasts. Since it was double on it, the travails for the Jewish people. Because Malik, the master says, but Tes B'Av, many bad things happened on Tisha B'Av. Charva Bayis, the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed by the first Beis Hamikdash was by the second one. Benilka the Beitar, and the great city of Beitar was captured. Even Echrasha Ir, and the city was plowed over. And therefore, since all these bad stuff happened, so therefore that's a date that is more critical.
But that second thing was already the Charbon from the second Bais. We said what happened on Shluchim and not Bismana Bais. And it was not yet happened.
That what? Say it again?
We say Hukkul Atzuras, the first Charbon, the second Charbon. But that we're talking the Shluchim and not was Bismana Bais Shiny.
No, but our mission is talking about when after the Churban.
It was already after the Churban.
Because we said Bisman Beis Hamikdash, then we said that by Pesach Sheni.
So why about Pesach?
But they're right, but that's obviously our mission was being authored after when there was no Beis Hamikdash. Now Taisa actually asked, the Gemara tells us in Tainus that Shiva Asar B'Tammuz also happened 5 different things. So why is Shiva Asar B'Tammuz different than Tisha B'Av? So Taisa says, well, first of all, Churban Beis Hamikdash obviously is worse than whatever happened to Shiva Asar B'Tammuz. Or Taisa says you can't compare it to Tisha B'Av because the same tzara happened 2 times on that same day. Churban Bayis Rishon and Churban Bayis Sheni, that Huchbulu B'Tzares, it was doubled over, and therefore that's worse, and therefore that's one date that we have an obligation to fast, and therefore the agents are sent out on Tisha B'Av in contrast to the other fast. Now, going back to that pasuk that we quoted, that was brought in to show that we have these other fasts, so we actually have a machlekes how to interpret this pasuk. Tanya Linda Bryce, Amr Shimon. He says, there's 4 things that Rabbi Kiva darshan, which it's brought in this 3, what this, in the Tosefta, what those other 3 are, but the one we're about to quote is one of those 4. He says, but ani ain't dervish kamaisa, but I don't expound it like him, which is this pasuk that we quoted before. He said, Koyam Hashem tzavakas. Soimer Revi. So what is the fast of the 4th? So he says, Zed Tes B'Tammuz. That's referring to the 9th of Tammuz. What's the 9th of Tammuz? Shabbat Hufko Ir. Because that's when the city was burst open, which Tais discusses regarding which Beis HaMikdash, but it's on the first one over here by the Churban Bayis Rishon, the city was burst open. Shlomo says the pasuk in Yomei. The gear says actually B'Chodesh HaRevi in the 4th month, which is Nisan, Iyar, Sivan, Tammuz. That's what's called Tzemid Revi in the 4th month. B'Tishla Chodesh on the 9th of the month. B'Chazik Harav Be'ir, and the famine was strong in the city. There was no bread for the people of the land, but Tifkei and the city was finally broken open by the enemy. Now, Balai Kor Levi, why is it called the Tzemid Revi? Because Revi L'Chadashim, because it's the 4th of the month from Nisan. Okay, that's fast number 1. Tzemid Chamishi, what's the fast of the 5th? Zed Tisha B'Av, that refers to the 9th of Av. Shabbai Nisr Beis Lekenu, when our Beis HaMikdash was burnt. Why is it called the 5th? Because Chamish L'Chadashim is the 5th month, which after Tammuz, which was the 4th, comes Av, which is the 5th. Tzemid Shvi, the fast of the 7th. What does that refer to? Zed Gimel B'Tishrei refers to the 3rd of Tishrei. Shabbai Neder Gedalia Ben Achikim, which actually was killed on the 2nd, but he couldn't do a fast on the 2nd, so we'll do it on the 3rd of Tishrei. That Gedalia Ben Achikim was murdered. Umi Harga, who killed him? Shmuel ben Netanya Harga, he killed him. Now, the Metchlis comes to teach you Sheshkula Misasan Shal Tzadikim, because we're putting into all this series of fasts which are all about Churban Beis HaMikdash. So why are we putting in the death of this tzaddik? To tell you that's because Shefet Beis Lekenu is the equivalent as like the burning of our Beis HaMikdash. Now, Michael Lishu, why is it called the fast of the 7th? It's the 7th month, which is Tishrei. And then we have Tzemah Asiri, the fast of the 10th. Zerasar B'Tevis, this refers to the 10th of Tevis. Shabbai Samach Melech Bavel al Yerushalayim, because that's when the king of Bavel surrounded Yerushalayim and he started to wage war against it. Shalom says the pasuk in Yechezkel, V'hi devar Hashem elai b'shana ha'tashiyis, and it was the word of God was to me in the 9th year, b'chodesh ha'asiri in the 10th month, which is Tevis, b'asar ha'chodesh in the 10th of the month, which is Asar b'Tevis Lema saying, Ben Adam, son of man, K'sav l'cha Hashem hayom, write for you the name of the day, as etzem hayom, as the essence of this day, Samach Melech Bavel al Yerushalayim, that the king of Bavel surrounded Yerushalayim. We see that it's a significant date in the travails of the Jewish people. My correlation, why it was called the fast of the 10th? Because Asir l'Chadashim is the 10th of the month. Now, this fast, what's the Tzayim HaSiri, which is being mentioned last, really should have been written first, because that's the first thing. Before the city walls are being broken open, before the Beis HaMikdash is being destroyed, they first surrounded the walls. So this is mentioned, so why is it written over here at the end? Oh, because he wants to just put the months in order. 4, 5, 7, and 10. So it's going to order of the months. But it says, that's what Rabbi Kiva says, Darshan the Pasuk. But I don't say like this. I say, what's Tzayma Asiri? That's Zechamish B'Tevis. Yeah, it's in the 10th month, but not Asar B'Tevis. It's the 5th of Tevis. Shabai Bas Shemua L'Goyla. That's when the reports came to the Golas Yechanya, to those who already were in Golas Bavel already 11 years before the Churban, as the Gemara tells Megillah Daf Yorav and Beis. They heard the report that the city was destroyed. They already went into Golas before it was destroyed. Shemai says, "But he b'shtei Esrei Shana was in the 12th year, Ba'asiri in the 10th month, B'chamish l'chodesh in the 5th of the month, B'golaseinu to our exile. Bo'ilai ha'pod Mishlayim. So one of the survivors from Yerushalayim came to me, later telling me, Huksair, the city was destroyed. And they made the day of hearing the reports as bad as the day of when the Beis HaMikdash was actually destroyed, and therefore that's this fast of Tzayim Asiri of the 5th of Tevis. not Asar B'Tevis from when the walls were surrounded, which was years before. And the 5th of Tevis, when those people heard the reports that the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, which is obviously after these dates, because it's after the whole downfall of Yerushalayim. And says, Reb Shimon v'nir dvara midvara. And my opinion seems better than that of Rabbi Kiva. Shani, because I say al rishon, whatever's first in the pasuk is rishon, is first in the punishments. Because first the city was burst open, which is Tzayim Revi. Then the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed on Tzayim Chamishi on Tisha B'Av. Then in the Tisha after that was Gedai ben Achikam was murdered. And then in the 5th of Tevis, that's when the bad reports came. So the order of the pasuk is also the order of how the events happen. And whatever's last is mentioned last. He says al rishon, whatever's first in the pasuk, he says as achron is actually later in the punishment. That which is late in the pasuk is rishon, is first in the punishment. Why? Not all of them, but rather because he first. What first happened was that the city walls were surrounded on Asar B'Tevis, and only subsequently was it burst open on Shabbat B'Tamas. And he's mentioning it later in the pasuk, even though it happened earlier in the events. Now, but Ela Shavumayla said Chadash. It's just that he's counting in the order of the months, and he's going to tell you that the pasuk is not particular about the historical sequence. Rather, it just wants to tell you the order of months, and therefore it says Tammuz before Tevis. But I'm counting also, let's say the Puranis, to the order of how the punishments actually happened in historical sequence, and therefore it says my pshat is better because I'm not just saying the order of the months, I'm also saying the order of the events as they happen. Now, related to this psukim that we mentioned regarding all these days that were fasts, that were also we said was l'sasna l'simcha, when at the time of the Mesmigdash was around, these dates were actually joyous dates. So that introduces us to the following discussion. Here's what we learned. Rav and Reb Chanina Amri, they both say, Batla Megillas Tainis. They hold that the scroll of the fast, as it was called, which was a listed days of minor Yom Tovim when fasting was prohibited, the Chachamim had made certain days as Yom Tovim because of miracles that happened on them, and they said, I'll fast. And some were even more stringent, you couldn't even eulogize. And it was written in one scroll, Ilan Yomaya, these are the days that you shouldn't fast on them, etc. Now that the Beis Hamikdash is destroyed, these two are saying that these Yom Tovim are nullified, and we don't have these Yom Tovim anymore, and you're allowed to eulogize and you're allowed to fast. That's what it means, Bat Megillas Tainis. Rabbi Yechon and Rabbi Shloimy Levi Amri, they disagree. They say no, Bat Megillas Tainis. The Megillas Tainis has not been nullified. So the Gemara explains, Rav and Reb Chanina Amri, they both say Bat Megillas Tainis that this scroll of when you are not allowed to fast and eulogize has been nullified. Because Hachikam, this is what, and we quoted this in the pasuk before, that the pasuk tells us, B'zman she'esh shalom, when there's peace, yulasasn l'simcha. Then it should be for joy and for gladness. Ein shalom, if there's no peace, then tzayim. Then you have to fast. So, although that in the time of the Beis Hamikdash, we called it Yom Tovim, but now it's a fast. So, meaning, regarding those dates that we mentioned of Asar B'Tevis, and Shabbat B'Tamas, all those that were mentioned in the pasuk of Tzema Revi, Tzema Chamish, Tzema, right? We call them Tzayim, but the pasuk then says Yila Beis Yila L'Sas L'Simcha. So just like over there, that when the Beis Hamikdash was around, there was Sas L'Simcha. But when the Beis Hamikdash is not around, you told me that they are L'Tzayim, Tzema Revi, Tzema Chamish. You fast in all these days. So he says, so then this also, all these quote minor Yom Tovim of Megillas Tainis, Kihani is the same thing. That just like those were nullified as Yom Tovim, and now they're fast days. Here also, these minor Yom Tovim are also nullified, and now you could also fast and eulogize on these dates. Now, but Rabbi Yechon and Rabbi Shloimy Schwartzberg, they disagree. They say no, loy batel Megillas Tainis. It's not true. These minor Yom Tovim that we have in times of the Mikdash after Churban is not nullified. Because I'll tell you why it's different than what you're trying to compare to for the psukim we brought earlier on this summit. Hani hu de talina rachmana b'minim Beis Hamikdash. Regarding those days, Asar B'Tevis, Shabbat B'Tamas, the Torah makes them dependent on the building of the Beis Hamikdash, because through the Churban was why they became fast days. Now, when the second Beis Hamikdash was built, then they were made into Yom Tovim. Now, so that's what it was when they built the second Beis Hamikdash. They sent the people of the diaspora. Am I going to cry on the 5th month? Which now the Beis Hamikdash is over here. So that's what it's saying. That became Sasna Simcha into Yom Tovim. But when the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, then it goes back to being a Tainus again, because it is bad things. But these minor Yom Tovim, as we'll quote some of them, they weren't because of the Beis HaMikdash as a Yom Tov. So therefore, if the Beis HaMikdash is destroyed, that shouldn't nullify them, and therefore, loy bat Megillas Tainis, and those days are still forbidden to go ahead and fast on. Now, Masur Rav Kahana. Rav Kahana asks on the following brisa on the one who says that bat Megillas Tainis, that you could fast on these minor Yom Tovim once the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. Because the brisa says, Maisa, there was a story, but Gozer Tainis B'Chanukah B'Loy. The people had made a decree of a fast day on Chanukah and Lud. The Yored Rabbi Lazar B'Rachatz, Rabbi Lazar went, he took a bath. Rabbi Shua B'Sipa, he got a haircut. V'amulahem, and they said to them, to all the people, Tzu'u v'zanu, go out and fast, in other words, do tshuva, amashes anisim, for this that you did fast. Meaning, because it was not appropriate on Chanukah to be fasting. Now, Rabbi Lazar and Rabbi Shua were after the Churban Abayis, because their Rebbe was Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai, and the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed in Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai's days. So they were obviously after the Churban Beis HaMikdash, and even so we see that loy bat l'Megillas Tainis. We see that Chanukah is one of those mentioned Megillas Tainis, and you see that you're not allowed to fast. So you see not like the man the Alma that says bat l'Megillas Tainis, because if it was bat, then they're allowed to fast. So what are they doing saying you have to fast for the fact that you fasted? So Maris is in the Shani Chanukah. Chanukah is different because they can mitzvah. There's a mitzvah of Ner Chanukah related to it, therefore that's different than all the other, that wasn't batal, but the rest is batal. So Levi says, what do you mean? What is b'tavat mitzvah? So who cares that there's a mitzvah? Nullify the Chanukah and nullify the mitzvah related to Chanukah, because you told me that once the Churban happened, the bat Megillas Tainis, so this Yom Tov should be nullified with its mitzvah. So Elam Rabbi Yisrael, rather Rabbi Yisrael says a different shot. It says, no, Chanukah is different than Mefaras and Nisa. What does that mean? So Rashi explains, he said, when you say in Mefaras and Nisa, every Jewish person already knows by the mitzvah of Chanukah, they already treated this Yom Tov like a biblical mitzvah. So it's not appropriate to nullify it. I mean, if it's a kleiner mitzvah, make a tikkun or whatever because it's a Megillas Tainis, the Yom Tov, it's okay, you could stop it. Chanukah, and there Chanukah for 8 days, everyone's been lighting in the windows, only you stop it. So since that's such a publicized for this miracle, it wouldn't be appropriate to nullify it. So therefore, even after the Churban Beis HaMikdash, they kept it and you're not supposed to fast. But it still doesn't reject, it could be all the other fasts, it is batla. But the Gemara continues to ask, he asks from the Brisa Megillas Tainis itself. Megillas Tainis was written for the populace, so therefore it was written in Aramaic. And it says over there, in the Megillas Tainis, these words, B'tlasa b'Tishrei, and the third of Tishrei, B'telas ad karta min shtaraya. They stopped mentioning God's name in the documents. Where the reason what the history behind this says the Megillas Tainis is Shegazah Malchus Yavin Gezeda, because the Greek government had made a decree that you're not allowed to mention God's name. Now, when the Chashmonaim overpowered the Greeks and they won, Hiskinu, so they instituted that we should always be mentioning God's name. Even in the documents, on the dollar bills, which actually saw someone at a shayla yesterday, they're taking the dollar bill into the bathroom because it has God's name. It says, "In God we trust." So the one who was answering this said, "Yeah, you should have it in your jacket pocket or whatever in your wallet, not have it out because it mentions God's name on the documents, on the shtaris." So what happened was the Chashmonaim said, "Yeah, let's put it even on the documents, on the dollar bills. We'll put God's name to do pink faket from the Yevonim. They wanted to tear out God's name. We're going to put it everywhere." And they would write in the documents, and this year to Yechon Kohen Gadol, to the supreme God, and they would write this in the documents. Now, actually, when the sages heard about this, they said, "No, this is not a good thing, because Lamachar tomorrow doesn't mean tomorrow. So when kids say yesterday, remember yesterday we went there, it means like a previous time. So tomorrow is this guy's going to pay back his debt. What's he going to do with the document? He's going to throw it into the garbage, and you can have God's name profaned and defiled by being thrown into the garbage. So ubitlan. So with great difficulty, the sages were able to nullify the practice, because actually the people already were doing this. When the sages heard about this, that they're writing God's name, they actually nullified it. And they were so glad with this, and they considered it such a miracle, that Va'isa Yemaso Yom Tiv. On the third of Tishrei, actually made it into a Yom Tiv Chazal, because they were so excited that the people stopped putting God's name in the documents, which is saving the disgrace of God. So therefore, that's one of the Yom Tov Megillas Tainis. Now, says the Gemara, the Isaac that the bottom Megillas Tainis, if you think to say like the one who says that after the Megillas Tainis was nullified, so you tell me Kamaisa Bottle. You tell me that the original ones you nullified. They're adding on now after the Churban. They're adding on more money Yom Tovim. So the Gemara says, what do you mean? There's not a Beis Hamikdash guy. What do you mean? Hey, this is where the Chashmanon, the Beis Hamikdash was around, and therefore when the Beis Hamikdash was around, the Megillah Tainis was not bottled, and therefore they still were around to be able to add on. But yes, after the Churban Beis Hamikdash, when they nullified the original ones, we're never not going to be adding on anymore because we don't keep even the original ones, because we're not going to add on anymore. Thank you to any time.